Welcome. Welcome to another episode of The Impact of AI, sponsored by AI Time Journal and supported by women leaders in data and artificial intelligence. For those of you whom I've not met, my name's Melissa Drew, and I will be your host for this week's episode. Our guest today is Amanda Griffin. She is with Twine AI. Twine AI is a global data collection services for audio and visual raw content, which we will definitely be diving in deeper in the remainder of this episode. Welcome, Amanda.
Thank you very much for having me. Pleasure to be here.
I I learned recently that you have been with Twine AI since its early stages.
Mhm.
What about the company sparked your interest? Why did you join?
Well, it was actually in the height of the pandemic when I joined,
Mhm.
and essentially I was externally doing and still am doing a psychology degree, and I was learning all about theory of mind and the concept of is that translatable into AI, and obviously started delving deeper into that, and then found a company who were looking for someone to help them grow an AI data service, which was
Mhm.
Twine AI. And so because of that interest externally, I actively promoted myself to them and was fortunate enough to get in at the ground floor, so to speak.
So I when I introduced you, I mentioned that Twine AI is a global data collection services and
Hmm.
it's audio and visual, and we've noted that it's the raw content.
Hmm.
Can you explain a little bit more about what Twine AI is doing and why, you know, with you joining the company, you obviously saw a connection between what you were doing in your psychology degree, but a
Hmm.
little bit more about what Twine AI is doing and why it's different.
So basically, Twine AI grew out of a freelance network,
Mhm.
essentially for creative freelancers, and we were approached with an idea of could we provide a lot of participants for visual data primarily, producing just videos that would then be annotated of doing specific activities and so on. And what they saw was that could we do this on a global scale? Is this something that companies are going to need? Because with a network of over 500,000 freelancers that are located across 190 countries, we can really show that we can diversify that data, and we can make sure that everything is consented, and that the data that is being used is really progressing the valuable work that's being done with AI in both a research capacity and on a product level as well. So in terms of that raw data, we will get specifications from people and fully understand exactly what the aims of this data and what the aims of the model are, and then produce this data with specific participants, giving clear instructions and making sure that data is usable and can be built upon and scaled as much as need be, to ensure that we are making that difference, and that the models are truly representative of who they want to be representative of, not just a very small amount of people.
So is your company collecting the data and then enabling customers to use the raw data, or are you using the data to support the products or services that you're developing?
We specifically, so essentially we are the people who bring the participants, essentially. So we work with companies who have specific requirements in relation to training their models, and we understand exactly what those aims are for that model,
Mhm.
and we ensure that either the audio or visual data that is produced is according to those specifications. And one of the main things that companies do come to us for is to get the diverse range of people, and just ensure that those models are accurately reflecting the range of people that could either use their product or to further any research that is actually being conducted in specific areas.
Earlier, you mentioned the diversity, and I think you said there was over 500,000. Is that correct?
That's right.
Of individuals within your network. So the context here is that if I'm a company looking to collect data, instead of trying to go out and collect it on my own and recognizing that I may have not a breadth or depth of that data set, which then I think what we're saying here is what opens the door for potential data bias. Then what I hear from you is you're collecting data utilizing this network of 500,000 individuals, which on its own sounds like it's solving some of the diversity aspects that you feel that your customers have a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. And the great thing about Twine AI is because obviously we do have that access to those participants. We have made sure that diversity is our watchword as well. So our participants have the option to identify as part of a unique group if they want to, and they can actually get information on specific projects that may require people from those specific groups as well. But it's not a basis that, you know, people can say, oh, well, I'm only being used for this. It's just if they are comfortable to do that, then obviously we're happy to represent the diverse range of people that are participating in those data sets. But it does give them the opportunity to work within a specific group if those specific projects come up as well.
Perhaps you could clarify for me where the data is coming from. So I think where I'm trying to dive deeper in is the data coming from those 500,000 individuals or, okay. So the data itself. Okay. So I think what I understand is that you have a requirement from a specific customer. Let's say it's, financial data and they need to see it globally. And you've got this representation of 500,000 individuals who are responding to a series of questions or surveys in order to collect that data.
Yes, that could be one scenario. Another scenario could be, for example, that you need facial recognition images and you need people to across different genders, you know, the different races, whatever it is you need, and you need people to produce video of them literally moving their head in certain circumstances. We can do that and make sure that there is a breadth and representation of global communities with regard to that. So it very much depends upon the requirements that particular clients have, but once we have that information, we give the instructions to the participants as to what needs producing. So if, for example, an audio data set's required and it's required in French, for example, and it's command sentences or whatever it may be, we make sure that those recordings are produced. We vet those recordings as well to make sure they accord with those instructions, and we deliver that data to the client as required, and they will sign it off, and everyone's happy.
And then with the, looking at the opposite, you said audio, looking at the audio, it's, representation of all the different nuances in the language or the accents, like my accent is definitely not UK, but yours is.
Mine is very northern UK as well, so
That's a really good point.
we in that regard, because of the diversity of the network, we're able to work with accent work. I know quite a few companies have stipulations regarding like Scottish accents, because there is such variation in that, and in England in general, there are a lot of different ones there, but it varies from region to region. And because of that, and because we have not only the existing network that we work with, but also the capability to expand that network into areas and people who know people as well, because of that, it really just builds on that capability and ability to really diversify in terms of not only language, but also in terms of video demographics as well.
We've talked a little bit about 500,000 individuals, which, on the surface sounds like quite a bit, but in your explanation just a moment ago, recognizing that just within the US or just within the UK, nuances between northern UK and the southern UK, or maybe over in Wales, or across the water, is 500,000 enough? I mean, do you still feel that there's maybe some gaps where there's opportunities for expanding and improving?
Absolutely, absolutely. And by no means are we saying that that is the finite number. As I've just said, what we can do and what we have the capability to do is to expand that reach in terms of like specific accents or regions of places that we need. We can do that. It's not something that is a finite number, and we only use those 500,000 people, because the network has grown the way that it's grown, and our participants are from that network. It gives that capability to expand into that, and the sky is the limit in relation to that. So we will have the capabilities to make those connections and get that data there.
Amanda, could you give me some examples of a real world case study?
On which one? On audio, visual, anything?
I'd love to hear one of each, if possible. That would be great.
So in terms of audio data, we had a specific person we were working with who needed to recognize commands to particular systems, but needed to recognize those in various different languages, in various different volume levels. So essentially what we had to do was have recordings from people saying, say, 5 command words, and then they would do that at a position of 0.2 meters, 0.5, 1 meter, and I think the furthest length was 2 meters, if I recall. And we had to do that in various different languages. So we had French, German, and one of the Indian ones, which off the top of my head I can't remember at this point, but we were working with them on that in terms of that, so that they could obviously train their audio systems in that regard, which was really successful, and be continuing working in that vein. And in terms of a visual one, we've had so quite a lot of visual ones, actually. And I think one of the ones that we work with, so we need object recognition. So we've done a lot with filming things like how using kettles and different kitchen appliances, and we've also We've had a few for, like I said, the facial recognition ones, particularly during COVID. We've had having to recognize faces at distances in different lighting aspects, also at different camera angles, so from above, from the side, and basically getting those produced so that models can recognize as well when people are wearing face masks or glasses or any form of facial covering. So we've worked quite a bit in that as well.
I think what I find very unique about your company and your scenario is that if I look at this from the opposite side, so now I'm going to look at it from a potential customer. If I'm a potential customer and I'm looking to work with you to pull in some of that data, just simply because I don't know how to get access to this kind of data, and it sounds like you are the ones that can help facilitate that, but maybe I don't know all the things that I should know. And you've just covered a few of them. You know, for example, specifically with audio, recognizing that audio should be up close or further away or at different volumes or different words. What are some of the things that you can provide to some of our listeners that are in that data science, you know, early stages of the data collections, and they're looking at, and let's talk about maybe audio first. What are some of the things that they need to be thinking about in some of the features and the variables?
So precisely that. So one of the things that we do on our exploratory conversations, and particularly when we're speaking to startup companies and new models, is that we want to understand the ultimate aim. So if your aim with your audio is to get people to get something to be able to recognize a voice command of a specific user or owner, then the things that we do is look at exactly what that journey is as a user and discuss that with you. So for example, the distance of being able to recognize that particular person's voice, would you need to think about whether their voice will be muffled? So would you like some recordings where maybe someone's hand is over their mouth to do that? Would you look at if a particular angle would affect it, if there is external noise, would you want that to be cancelled out for your model, or would you want that to happen? One of the data sets, for example, that we worked with, we discovered we wanted the noise of like a kettle boiling or a TV in the background, because those things happen in real world situations, and a model will need to be able to distinguish that so that it can recognize the person speaking. So it's thinking about, and it's a very personal thing really, about what you're hoping to achieve. And because Twine AI is very people focused, I suppose we maybe think about this in a more I want to say diverse way, but I suppose in a little bit more layperson way sometimes, because we think about exactly the scenarios that we would encounter if we were using something, and it gives that very unique standpoint, rather than having the technical aspect, which we also go into as well, but having that capability to just say, okay, we're going to be using real world people, and these are going to be the things that will muffle a recording or may interrupt. So if you want to make these stipulations that data is in a soundproof room or anything like that, and that there's nothing obstructing that particular recording, then those stipulations need to be made. And it's something that is a an interesting exercise at the beginning of any particular requirement, because it's these little things that crop up, such as crumpling paper or the post box opening or whatever it is. It's that that needs to be taken into account, because these are going to be what users of a particular product are going to experience in real life, and the model needs to reflect and recognize that.
That's quite brilliant. That's brilliant. So as a follow-on, Amanda, we've talked a lot about the data collection, collecting the data, the 500,000 plus resources, the nuances, some of the kind of the lessons learned that folks can think about when they're looking at the collection of raw data. But the other aspect to this that we haven't covered is the ethical component of sourcing that data. So as a company, you're that middle person between the raw data that's being collected and what the customer is looking at, from their requirements. What is Twine AI doing to ensure the ethical component of that data?
So firstly, we're making sure that obviously we're understanding exactly what this data is going to do, and where that's going to be utilized, which is key. And then what we're actually doing is we provide full instructions, as I've said, to the participants within these collections. But what we make sure that they do is they understand exactly what the purpose of this data is, exactly how the data will be used. So whether it's for research purposes or whether it's for commercial purposes, and that they are happy to produce data in relation to that. And also that we make sure that once that data is actually produced, that it is stored correctly as well, so that people know that when they have produced this, it's not going to be something that is going to be misused. I think we've seen quite a lot in data, specifically for training AI models, that there is this penchant, I suppose, to scrape data from particular places without obtaining people's consent to use their images or to use their voice or anything like that. And that shouldn't be, it shouldn't be the case. And it's very much making sure that the data that is produced for the company, but also that the people who are participating in these products collections are ensuring that they know where this is going to go, and it's not going to be misused. They know exactly how it's to be used and when.
You mentioned they know. Is they meaning the individuals you're collecting the data from, or is they meaning the customer that you're collecting the data for?
Both.
Okay.
So essentially a client will have the opportunity to approve those consent forms. Okay. So we agree exactly what's going to go into them, and exactly where that data is going to be used. And then once that's confirmed with the client, then the participants will be asked, before they even start collecting, to review that consent form and the instructions that are given regarding the actual project itself, and make sure that they agree that to the use of their image or their voice or whatever specifically it is, and where that's going to be used. So we make sure that that is done before they even start collecting.
One of the examples that I wanted to outline for you is a scenario where the data is being collected, and I mention this because you've used the word raw content quite often, and as we look at that data collection process, once the data is collected, there's often additional steps that are changing the data, whether it's being labeled, segmented, enriched, if it potentially could be with audio or visual. And then oftentimes that data then goes into those AI testing, training models. And then sometimes we find that the purpose of the data somehow changes, or the intent of what the data was going to use somehow changes in the testing process.
Hmm.
So you're early on, data collection is at the very beginning of those stages.
Hmm.
Do you have a role at any point after the data has been handed off, or do you provide any guidance into, you know,
And
I see you smiling, so I'm
yeah.
just going to, or do you provide guidance to the customer? Let me just.
We absolutely, it's not just something that we send over the data and then job's done, and
Mhm.
unless that is what's required. But we can also provide those annotation services, so we do get involved in that, should they be required. And in terms of guidance and changing the data, in terms of that, it is very much agreed for a specific use and a specific purpose. If there needs to be different scenarios done, or different, or there is a change that is massively different to what has been consented to and agreed in terms of those specifications, then that would be an additional requirement, and additional data would be required for that. I think we need to be very careful in an age such as we're living in, and particularly in terms of using people data, because our image and our identity are very important and very private things to a lot of people. And I think with having those consents, we need to make sure that those are abided by, and that is one thing that we do advise in relation to companies that we work with, and institutions that we work with, is that we need to be very specific about how this data is used. And if you anticipate that is going to change at any point, then the consents must always be modified and redone, because there is a fundamental change to how this is being done, and people need to agree to that.
I think this is a good segue into your expertise in this area. What are some things, what are a couple of bullet points that you can provide advice within, so again, going back to similar to the question we had with audio,
Mm.
if I'm looking to work with you and I may be new in this area, but I really need to collect the data and utilize some of the expertise you have, what are some of the things that you could help me in understanding how to ensure that I maintain that ethical and responsible sourcing of the data?
I think, I mean, by no means can I comment in relation to any particular legal minutiae,
Right.
but with regard to generally, in terms of this, you've got to look at the wording of how you make these consents,
Mm,
and that they have to cover the scenarios that you want them to cover. It's no use saying A when actually you need A, B, and C. You need to really spell out very plainly exactly what you're intending to use this data for. And if there is, a fundamental change during the collection, and you're wanting to use it a different way, then yes, of course, you need to ask these people to utilize that, because you are still using that data there. And I think the thing is, and again, to refer it back to people being the objects of all this wonderful data, you need to relate it back to, ultimately, if you would want to know where your data was going from, which you obviously would, then if there was a fundamental change to that, you would want to know that too, and agree to it. If you haven't agreed to it, then there is a risk that you're going to fall foul of using data that's not permitted in that scenario. So Always just be very mindful of the subjects that are working with you, and obviously where you're going to do that. And if there is a change of circumstance, it is better just to outline it straight away and get that consent obtained.
No, I think that's quite good. I think that's going to be very helpful for a lot of the folks listening. The last thing I wanted to do before we wrapped up is oftentimes we talk about how to maintain responsible sourcing. We talk about ensuring that it's explainable and more specifically transparency. And
Mhm.
we really focus on the need to develop. Sometimes we call it a data fact sheet, but recognizing what's the data being collected, what are some of the assumptions that were made when the data was collected, maybe what's missing in the data. As you pull together these data collection services, is developing that data fact sheet a part of that, or is that something that you collaborate with your customer with?
So one of the things, and one of the best parts of discussing Twine AI is
Hmm.
that we have a fabulous project management team. And basically what they do is they will work with you on a daily basis with regard to these data collections. So
Hmm.
they sort out all the consents, they make sure that the instructions are abided by, they vet the data as well according to those specifications, and are basically on hand to have a feedback loop with you, and make sure that if we review the data store and you see that you have maybe a higher conservation of male participants to female participants, for example, they
Hmm.
will discuss that with you and maybe dial down the male participants and up the female ones. So it really does give that transparency in relation to the collections, and also if there is a change in, as we've just been discussing,
Hmm.
with regard to consents, they will make sure that is padded out with you and sent to the right people for the data that you want to perhaps change the usage of. So it really does form a partnership in that, and in terms of production of metadata generally, they will make sure that everything that is needed to go into the model for the algorithms and everything else is all available there, and they make sure that that's delivered in exactly the way that's agreed with particular clients. So it does give that absolute transparency as to where they're at and where you need to be in terms
Hmm.
of that collection.
Well, Amanda, we are coming to that point in time where we need to wrap up. Is there anything that you'd like to leave behind? Any advice that somebody who's out there thinking, "Wow, I didn't realize that there was all these little things I needed to think about."
I think we are at an interesting point
Hmm.
in our evolution, not only as a species, but in the way that we deal with data generally,
Hmm.
specifically with regard to models. And I think the thing is, ultimately think about how people are going to utilize, how your model is going to affect how somebody utilizes something, and the steps that you would need to take in the simplest of things. And you would be surprised how many different steps there are, and to have somebody be able to guide and support you through that, and kind of not take that away, but support you in making sure all those steps are available is really important, and just have that support and guidance there, and you won't go far wrong.
Yeah, no, I thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate you providing with some lessons learned, some bullet points. That I think there's a lot here to unpack and to really think through. Um, and this was great. Thank you. Thank you again.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure.